All right. 3, 2, are we live? Tick, 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 tick.
I got a problem with you, and you got a problem with me, so we'll duke it out.
Tick, 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 tick. We are live? Are we live? Is everyone here?
Live, you motherfucker.
Are we live?
Yeah, you're live, motherfucker.
All right.
Oh, by the way, I told them that they could check out your streams, and I gave them the channel name and everything. Since we're live, though, we can't say their names or anything.
Yeah, but anyway. Okay. So, hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this day's burning subjects. It's Thursday, and today we'll throw you in the firebox if you piss us off. So it's a real burning subject.
Okay. But before anything, I would just like to say that,
It's just us.
that. And today, particularly, is going to be the last burning subjects that I do for a while. So this is season 1 over. This is the last burning subjects that I will do for quite a while. Because... Hold on! Okay.
So, how y'all doing today on this fine, day? Andrew has mysteriously vanished, meaning I'm in charge of burning subjects today. So, today on Burning Subjects, we will be talking about how fat Mr. Sarch is. He is so fat that he sunk a ship. He's so fat that if he was to jump in the middle, he'd split the damn thing into two.
What did I miss? Okay.
He's also so fat that if he was to jump on the back of the bus, he would cause a wheelie!
Hi, Felicia. But anyway. So, I'm back. But this is going to be the last burning subject stream I do for a while. Because I just graduated last week.
Do not show your damn diploma.
Why?
Because I don't want those tarts to get. And I'm not calling everybody tards. I'm just calling the,
Josh,
you know.
cool down. Cool down.
Like to be, but it's called burning subjects. My mind is burning.
Anyway, but, yeah, this is going to be the last stream that I do for a couple of months. Just because I'm going to be finally moving on with my life. Because I'm out of high school, got my diploma, I'm going to be starting college, I'm going to Colorado, I'm going to some place, I'm going to be having fun.
Come to
Ohio! Anyway, so, today's subject is the top 10 underdog Steam excursion stars. And what do I mean by that?
Also, before we go on with the subject, I just want to mention, since it's just us, I'm probably not going to be my usual self on the streams today.
Why?
Well, because there's no one to make laughs at, and I can't piss Jim off or Ryan or anything, so...
Yeah. You know. For those who don't know, Ryan and Jim are off right now. Well, because they're also moving on with their lives.
Oh yeah, should I mention how I plan on doing it too?
Go ahead!
So, just a few days ago, or was it a week, I actually got to see the engine shed of my favorite railroad. And, let's just say, I might be getting a job. Railroad's name will go unnamed, because unnamed.
However, there might be some people here watching the stream right now who work there. But...
Yeah, because I told them about our channel.
But anyway, so... What are underdog Steam excursion stars, you might ask? Basically, they are Steam locomotives that were retired in the 50s, but haven't run for a very, very long time, and are only very recently getting the attention and the love and the excursions and the runs that they want, that they deserve. These are very recent. Either they were recently restored to operation or they are currently under restoration. We're going to be counting down the top 10 underdog Steam excursion stars. Well,
Sorry.
and sadly, we don't have the cool wall today. Yeah, we're going to be talking about 1504, which is actually the first one on the list at number 10. Atlantic Coastline 1504, which actually is a sole survivor, if you didn't know. Which, let me pull up the... I don't know much about this locomotive, but what I do know is that this thing is actually more than meets the eye, to say the least. Because on the surface, it looks like a regular 462 Pacific locomotive. But if you look in depth, you might find some interesting things, such as it's one of only a handful of USRA Pacifics, and it's the only one that is a light Pacific. Yes, built by the American Locomotive Company in 1919, which also known as ALCO. But
that's sorry if I'm kind of screwing around with the stream and going off topic when I say this, but kind of the reason that I modeled a certain locomotive on my channel, because I was trying to gain the attention of one of the workers to a chance to see the place and even try to work there.
But let's get back to 1504. So after that, 1504, much like other 462s, was built for passenger service, till being retired, of course, in the 50s to a park, which interestingly was directly in the middle of a parking space, not a actual a parking zone for cars. Although, after 70 years plus of silence in that park, the United States Sugar Company, which recently restored a veteran excursion star, Florida East Coast 148, has taken the 1504 for restoration as a running mate to 148, which that rhymed.
Shit in the bait, make 148.
But to say the least, it is interesting that not many people have talked about this sole survivor, and I only knew about it just because the U.S. Sugar Company was restoring it, and the fact that there's only one of these gives it quite a spot. Although the biggest reason is that it's not up there on the higher is because it's a fairly common wheel arrangement in the preservation era. And it's also not the most powerful or the most impressive, but it is definitely one of the more historically important when it comes to sole survivors. So that leaves it at number 10, and the fact that it's getting, restored by a sugar company. So that's going to be nice.
I'm going to make some sugar out of anyway.
Anyway, though, ironically, another 462 is coming next, and that is number 9 at Boston and Maine 3713.
Andrew?
Yes?
After this, when are we going to get to the moguls?
That's coming.
All right.
No, it's not coming. It's not. I know what you're thinking.
A mogul.
Okay. So, the thing is, while Atlantic Coastline 1504 is a sole survivor in its own right, it's not the only one left from its railroad. However, 3713 is the only surviving 462 left from the Boston and Maine Railroad. And it's also one of only a handful of steam locomotives in the United States that are officially named.
Wales.
And this particular name is Constitution. And particularly, this locomotive was built in December of 1934 as a P4A, which is also worthy to know that this locomotive was built by Lima, which automatically puts it more up there because Lima is awesome. So, was my little brother behind me?
No.
Okay.
He's got a pickle and he's on the other side. Actually, an eggplant. And he's
Anyway.
giving me a really smirky smile.
Anyway. 470? Sadly, 470 isn't on this list, even though I probably should. Although we should probably mention it, later on in honorable mentions, because it was a farewell to Steam Star, which. Anyway, so 3713, after being retired from the Boston and Maine, was bought by F. Nelson Blount for his Steamtown, USA collection, which at the time was still in Bellows Falls, Vermont. And then, once the whole collection was moved, the locomotive went along with it. But recently, as of now, Steamtown, USA only has one operational locomotive, Baldwin 26, which we talked about last time. But
I'll tell you after the stream.
But originally, there were two other locomotives. There were 3254, which we've talked about millions of times, and 2317, which we haven't talked about much, but we know is in pretty sorry condition. But since both of those two locomotives are an absolutely uneconomical restoration worthiness, 3713 has been chosen to replace one of them, which was quite a call because this locomotive actually has quite an impressive tractive effort, to say the least. And ever since, even though this locomotive has been under an intense restoration at Steamtown, it hopefully will actually represent Steamtown in a good way. Whereas,
this doesn't just mean that the engine will have a good tractive effort, but it also means it'll have a great story too.
Yeah, and not to mention, since 462s at the Boston and Maine were known for their speed, it should also be, quite. What can I really say? It should be a good excursion star in the future.
Gotta go faster, 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 faster.
God damn it. But anyway. But the only reason that this one is a little bit lower is Steamtown. And plus, the locomotive has been under restoration for quite a while. And it was delayed more than you want to know. But anyway, let's get on to the next locomotive. Which, this one is one of my personal... This one is one of my personal favorite steam locomotives in existence.
2100?
No.
Shit.
Although...
Hey, why is 2100 not your favorite?
It is my favorite. 2100...
How dare you betray me like that?
2100 is my favorite locomotive. But it doesn't...
Give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna throw you off a mogul in the middle of a creek.
Okay. Anyway, number 8 is Central New Jersey 113, which commonly among rail fans is known as a bobber, because the thing is, 113 currently stands as the strongest 060 in America, with a tractive effort that exceeds that of a 280. And the tractive effort, if you're wondering, Central New Jersey 113 has a tractive effort of 43,000 pounds, which that's 12,000 pounds more tractive effort than 1702. To put that into perspective, it's a powerful little locomotive for its size.
It's the size of a pig, but has the strength or the weight of a whale, or for a better comparison, Michael!
It's even got the boiler diameter of his stomach.
That's rough.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's also one of the largest 060s to operate. So 113 originally was, as I was saying, originally built in June of 1923. So next year, 113 is turning 100 years old. By, of course, ALCO for the Railroad of New Jersey, Central New Jersey, of course. And originally, these locomotives, of course, were just made for switching. just yard service. They really operated at low speeds, but the funny thing is, 113 has proven that it can go faster, even without the pilot truck. Even though it bounces around because of this. But during its revenue career, it was a very, very mellow sort of career. It was just a yard switcher. Although it was very powerful as a yard switcher, it didn't do much else outside of being a yard switcher. And thus, it would have been retired originally by if I remember, it was retired in 1951 from the CNJ. But the thing is, interesting enough, after that, it was sent to the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company for service over there. And that's actually the only reason 113 is still around. And then after...
She did not get retired.
Technically, anyway. But after that...
Yes, but actually no.
Yes, but actually no, yeah. But once it was sent to the...
say, well, yes, but actually no.
But after being sent to the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company, it was retired in 1960. And then it was finally actually preserved in 1980. Like, it was actually officially bought by someone who was intending to preserve it. Although, it wasn't very long before the owner lost custody of it. And then in 1986, it was bought again for preservation.
Jeez.
So,
how many owners did this engine go through?
Quite a few, to say the least. But that's...
You were one of them?
I would love to own this engine. But anyway. So, then it, of course, ended up in the yards of the Blue Mountain... Well, Blue Mountain Railroad, or the Blue Mountain Reading and Northern, or the Reading and Northern, or however you want to say it.
Reading and Northern, it's easier.
They ended up with the 113 in their yards. And so, initially in 2012, the restoration for 113 was completed after, quite a lengthy restoration for a little thing, about 15 years, but then again, it was pretty worn out. But 113, as of this point, has been serving as a surprising contribution to excursion service. Even though it's not suited for it's not suited for passenger service, it has the capability because of one major thing. Well, two major things. One, big, high boiler capacity, and two, the tractive effort. Okay, that's three then. And the third then would be the Baker valve gear. For those who don't know, 113 has Baker valve gear, which is the same type of valve gear put on various Vanswerk and Berkshires, or such engines like 611, or the 1218, or some of the more high-speed steam locomotives. So it seems rather off that they put Baker valve gear on a switcher. But it's paid off in the long run because of it, they can actually run that thing at fairly decent endurance speeds.
Damn, I wish I'd had that kind of endurance. I could have used it when I was... wait, what?
What?
Huh?
Okay.
I wasn't saying anything.
But anyway, after this restoration, it was expected that it would just, haul excursions like normal. However, one of the more interesting things that happened is that 113 ended up assisting the Reading and Northern when it came to their freight traffic for a little bit. You see, one of their diesel locomotives had a major failure, and once that said locomotive returned to service, they didn't want to risk damaging that diesel locomotive any further. And so 113 was pulled out in order to assist that locomotive during the freight service. In fact, you can actually find video of this. So, yeah.
You'll have to send me some later. I want to see this.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And the funny thing is, there's actually also video of 113 hauling a whopping 54 loaded cars without assistance.
Yes, Tyler, we have seen Reading 2102.
Oh, yeah, I've seen 2102. funny thing, I actually have a friend named John Howell, and he actually got to ride behind the original Ramblers. And recently he got to ride behind 2102. So
Too
that,
bad that the whole fleet didn't survive.
what do you mean?
Well, we only have 2102 and 2100 right now.
Actually, well, that are going to run. We have 2100, 2101, 2102, and 2124.
What about the other three?
What are the three? We mean?
Never mind. I guess they don't exist anymore.
There's 20. Well, anyway, though, yes, I like the Hooter. I love the 6 chime, but I like the Hooter just the same.
Hooting your dooter anyway.
But anyway, as of now, 113 continues to operate occasionally. However, the reason that this locomotive is a little bit lower, despite being a sole survivor of its class, being the most powerful 060 to operate in America, and assisting with diesel during the preservation era, there is one thing that doesn't rank it higher. And that's, well, crews are a little bit uncomfortable to drive the thing because of how bumpy it can be. And not to mention that, well, it doesn't run that often.
Did you hear what I said?
What?
Hooter your dooter. My name is Spooter. It was great.
Okay. Okay, hold on.
Your face in that clip. That's great. You're eating something.
Yeah, grilled cheese.
I got myself a grilled cheese, but I threw out the cheese, and instead of using buns, I only use crackers. So here, have some crackers now.
I got a grilled cheese. Actually, if 1504 does have Baker valve gear, then that increases the chance of it going faster even more. I'll have to find out myself in a little bit. But anyway,
I better get out of here, or else there's going to be fire going down my road.
What?
Huh?
What about fire?
If it's going so fast, the tracks burn. I better be on the lookout.
Okay, that was a good lead up. Okay. Okay. So next, we're going to be talking about, well, number 7 on this list of underdogs is Everett Valley 11. Which, Josh, since you were talking about a mogul!
A mogul.
Yes, now we got a mogul. So, personally, this is another one of my favorite steam locomotives. Well, not just because of its status when it comes to being an excursion star, but something about it oozes charm. The size, the power, the actual sound of it, and not to mention that originally it was actually intended for export to Cuba, but we'll get into that.
Is it narrow gauge?
No, but it is the same height as one.
I just got blue balled. I mean, what?
What?
Nothing. It's a joke. So, remember how I really liked Mikados at one point?
Yeah.
Jim said that I had an unhealthy attraction to them. So I was just joking around, acting like, yeah, I don't really have that anymore. Now it's moguls. So it's sort of a joke.
Well.
You know.
Anyway, though.
It's
so
funny.
Little 11 was constructed in 1920 by the Cook Works of the American Locomotive Company. So, well, of course, it's a mogul, or a 260, as you would say. And this particular one was one of 4 different wheel arrangements built between 1920 and 1925, intended for export to Cuba. The other types were 280s. However, building some of these locomotives wasn't very common practice. And especially when it comes to world sugar markets, which is exactly where these were going to go. These were going to go to the sugar mills of Cuba, which I recommend watching the videos of if you want to see some really good genuine steam locomotive action.
They're amazing.
Yeah. Nice, and they're filthy. They're filthy, they're
awesome.
grimy, and they sound awesome. Not to mention,
workers too.
yeah, not to mention, if you watch them long enough, you'll find some fireless locomotives in there too.
Speaking of which, when it comes to sugarcane, I think there's a railroad in Hawaii that still does sugarcane with steam engines, a narrow gauge railroad.
Well, anyway,
have to do a video, Andrew. We're gonna have to do a video on one day on some of the most charming locomotives. I think you and I both have some really good ones.
Well, let's see here. But anyway, so 11, as I said, was intended for export to Cuba. But the thing is, this never happened. And as a result of that, it waited about 3 years in the shops until it was finally sold to the tiny Narragansett Pier Railroad in Peace State, Rhode Island, which they purchased the engine, and this was when the number 11 was assigned to it. They put it to work on their 8.5-mile railroad, which was quite long for a locomotive of its size. So 11's life actually lasted only 11 years over there, as it was then replaced with
numbered 11. That's why it's numbered 11, because
no.
It only lasted 11 years.
No, I was trying to say that it lasted 14 years in service over there, until it was replaced with the diesel locomotive in 1937. And then it was sold to the Bath Hammondsport Railroad in Hammondsport, New York. Hammond! Anyway.
He's trying to kill me again.
With the B&H operating 9 miles between its namesake communities, primarily served... Well, this locomotive particularly served just regions with, like, wine producers and small businesses like that. And it did its job quite well as that. It was a living symbol of the great American tradition of small independent railroads connecting local communities with the National Railway Network, which, this particular locomotive, of course, 11, weighing 55.5 tons. So that's interesting on its own. Although it's also noted that it was built as an oil burner, which I'll get into in a little bit.
Was it converted to burn steam?
How do you burn steam, Josh?
I mean, coal.
You
can recycle steam, but you can't burn steam unless you're,
Guys, help. My little brother has a carrot.
What should I do?
Stick it up its ass!
But
Stick it up his ass, Anthony.
Okay. Anyway.
That was great.
So, after spending its time at the B&H, it was finally retired in 1949 in favor of another diesel locomotive. So it was replaced and retired twice in revenue service, which is interesting on its own. It was then after this that it was carefully stored in the railroads of the engine house until it was sold in 1955 to Dr. Stanley, apparently. A gorman of his rails.
Stanley? Is he flat? I mean, what?
What?
You don't get the joke?
Fly away, Stanley. Be free.
No, you don't get the... It's a joke. There's a book series called Flat Stanley. That's why I said, Stanley, is he flat?
I don't know.
Whatever. I tried.
Anyway. Okay, as I was saying, Stanley A. Gorman bought the locomotive for his Rail City Museum in Sandy Pond, New York. Dr. Gorman was a pioneer railroad preservationist, and for many years the locomotive operated on his mile-long circuit track. But he didn't haul any excursions. So it still counts.
What did he haul instead?
Just small freight.
So he used it commercially, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they say, You don't have any steam locomotives in commercial service. Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
And if you were to say, we do in other countries, they'd say, yeah, not the U.S. This proves wrong. We do have commercial engines in America.
And the craziest part is that 11 lasted until 1977 in this late freight use, until it was finally sold to another collector. Although this time it wasn't replaced. This time it was sold to another collector, Dr. John P. Miller, who had earlier purchased the Narragansett Pure Railroad. Thus,
Narragansett. I don't know how to say that. It's like Armageddon, but Narragansett. I don't know.
Thus, this locomotive once again returned to the engine house of Peacedale, Rhode Island. After this, some disassembly and inspection was done. Well, Dr. Miller never actually completed the overhaul number 11 needed to operate further. And so, again, it was sold in 1981 to the Middleton and New Jersey Railroad of Middleton, New York.
Andrew, you know what time it is?
What?
You know how I normally would do a little joke quote for the day?
Yeah?
I think instead, let's do the... You okay, John? Let's do a meme. Ready for the meme?
What?
I'm going to send it to you in DMs. You are able to show this to the audience, by the way, when I send it.
Okay, let's take a look here.
The meme for today is...
And then there's Maud!
You better zoom in on it. That way, you know, they don't see the other photos.
And then there's Maud! Anyway.
I lost access to the stream. I need to look again. Give me a minute.
But then there's Maud! Anyway.
My thing's being slow.
But anyway.
Get that joke?
Yeah.
I can't get on the stream, so I'm just gonna stay in Discord.
Okay. But anyway. So, as I was saying, that Ever 11 was sold again in 1981 to the Middleton and New Jersey Railroad of Middleton, New York, to a person known as Pierre Rasmussen, president of the Middleton and New Jersey Railroad, and was a fan of steam engines, of course, and thought 11 would be a perfect ideal addition to his short line. And the locomotive was stored inside the engine house and protected from the weather, but no further repairs were ever done. With sale of the railroad pending following his death in 2004, ownership of 11 transferred to James Wright, a business partner of this railroad. Wright, in turn, sold the engine to Alan Maples, president of the Everett Railroad, in 2006. And ever since then, after a timely 11-year restoration, number 11, ironically, returned to service for the first time after all those years of waiting for an overhaul. And as you all know, has been in service ever since. But interesting enough is that when it was handed to him, it was converted to burn coal, which, as I was talking about earlier. But the thing is, they found that 11 didn't like coal, to say the least, because it was designed to burn oil. But it lasted about quite a while. Ever since 2015, it's been operating under coal. And only a couple of months ago did they finally convert it back to what it was meant to burn, oil. And so ever since then, the locomotive has been operating quite a few decent excursions, as well as hauling a full-on Pullman train consist and operating a few photo specials, which one of our friends, John, really likes that particular photo special of that locomotive. But yeah, that's the history of number 11, and I highly recommend you go see this locomotive. Not because of the sound, but really just because the scenery and the locomotive combine beautifully. Even though I've never been there, I'd love to. It's one of my bucket list areas that I'd love to go to.
And it's a mogul.
Yeah. All right. Next at number 6 is well, actually before I mention, the only reason number 11 isn't slightly higher is just because, well, who's that? Who's that in the background? Okay, it's all because it's just a mogul, which ironically is the reason that the next locomotive was put down higher. It's not a mogul. The next locomotive isn't a mogul, but it is a very, very common wheel arrangement. Because moguls, as we've seen, aren't actually very common to run in the preservation era in America. In fact,
what?
The only other standard gauge mogul that is currently operating is at the Strasbourg Railroad.
Yeah, that's just mean right there.
The only standard gauge one, anyway.
If I said Albert as one of the engines that is not currently running, and then you said only standard gauge, bitch.
Okay, but number 6 is Nevada Northern Railroad 81.
I was assaulted by a toothpick again.
Josh, you're gonna kill me. Anyway.
How? How am I going to kill you?
Nothing. It's nothing. But anyway. So, for those who don't know, the Nevada Northern Railroad is a small heritage line in, Las Vegas, Nevada, which currently they have a collection of 3 operable steam locomotives, with one of them, 40, being under an overhaul right now, which, interesting, 40 lasted an incredible amount of time without an overhaul. So this overhaul that it's getting recently is quite worth it. But since 40 was taken out of service, they needed another locomotive to keep up with the demand. And so, since they had another locomotive, which was 81, they restored that to operating condition, which I will get into the history of that in a second. But as I said, though, the major reason this locomotive isn't higher is because it's a 280. And if we had $1 for every time a 280 has ran in preservation, we would have enough to restore another one.
What?
Albert's not a 280, but
I don't care if he's not a 280. We need to restore Albert.
Okay, but anyway, actually, you know what? Chat, I want you to try naming all the 280s that you know have operated in preservation, whether they're running right now or not. Here, I'll type down a list as well. Let's see. So 734, obviously. 33.
will be running here soon.
29. 18. 19. These are the LS&I ones, just to make sure you guys know. What else? Oh yeah, well, 81, 93.
Hey, Andrew.
I
found out that they're not actually going to sell that mogul that I was telling you about.
618.
No. Number 3, also known as Albert, I know why they're not going to sell it. Yeah, guess why?
Why?
Well, this is what one of the workers, I really shouldn't be saying this on stream, but basically they turned down $1 million for Albert, and people say that they don't want to sell it because it's an original engine, but keep in mind, so was Mod. And what happened to Mod?
Oh, yes. Jim has also come up with a list. 2802, 2857, 3850. Well, here's some American ones that came up to my mind immediately. Well, those are just some American ones that came up like at the top of my head. But I bet if I sat here for longer, I would have been thinking of tons. Oh, yeah, 40. 40 has operated, obviously. But yeah, we have had a lot of 280s operate. A lot. A ton,
say
a
40.
shitload, a massive, a, you get what I mean. But
If you look, there is a consolidation then in between number 40 and the other your list. It's a beautiful one.
okay, but anyway, so 81 particularly, as it's a 280, obviously. This particular one was built by Baldwin in 1917. It's a typical 280. It's a very basic 280 when it comes to its actual building. But of course, as we know, 81 was built from mixed service. Interesting enough. On the Nevada Northern, 93 and 40 were sort of mixed when it came to their user friendliness. 93 was strong enough for certain trains because of how tiny its drivers were. But the thing is, its horsepower and endurance speed were incredibly low. The 40 was able to rocket along, similar to this was a similar situation to the Southern program with the Texas and Pacific 610 and 2839 and 2716. 81 in this case would have been 2716. Because of its Baker valve gear, 81 could actually handle a decent endurance speed. And so 81 was the more mixed traffic locomotive of the three. And so when 81 was retired, it was sent to the White Pine Public Museum in 1960. And, it sat there for quite a long time until the Nevada Northern acquired it along with 93, but ended up restoring 93 first, using some of 81's parts to make sure that 91 could be restored faster. Although this came back to bite them when they decided to restore 81 in the future, which took them a lot longer because they used some of the parts from 81 and put them onto 93.
Ew, that's disgusting.
What?
A 440 in that. Ugh, I just don't like Western 440s.
Well, anyway. After quite a long dormancy, 81 was finally returned to service last year. Just in October of last year, 81 finally moved under her own power for the first time since the 60s.
Western 440s are so overrated. I mean, beyond overrated. Can we have some other designs, please?
Would you rather have Sierra number 3? But anyway.
Let me see what number 3 looks like.
It's the locomotive from Back to the Future. But anyway.
Oh, that'd be decent.
Anyway. So the only reason that this locomotive is a little bit higher on this list is because of its incredibly unique paint job. The thing is, most 280s nowadays, in America at least, are painted in a basic black or with white striping or, not really much interesting shapes, or except for one railroad which had a Bosch job restoration, which painted their locomotive with orange striping, which it looks decent, but
You're not talking about the daylight, are you?
No, that's not a 280. Anyway, but 81, if you have seen her, has been painted in a beautifully lush dark green, which is very rare among steam locomotives in America, where, as in Britain, it's incredibly common!
What about yellow steam engines? Like, I know yellow is a really hard color to make a good locomotive in, but
Sweden has a few yellow steam locomotives. And Britain.
Actually look good.
And Britain also has a few yellow steam locomotives that actually look good.
They do?
Yeah.
I'd have to see them to know.
Well, Rocket is one of them, but...
Yeah, Rocket, obviously.
But anyway, so that's one of the major reasons that 81 was ranked slightly higher than the others, because of its incredibly unique paint scheme. It doesn't have a unique history, it doesn't have a unique wheel arrangement, it doesn't have... Well, there are a few... The only major thing that made it higher was the restoration itself and its looks, because it's a beautiful 280. It's, it stands out among the rest, especially because of its Baker valve gear. And not to mention the white trimming and the white stars, similar to the paint job of the daylight.
Among us. Anyway.
Well, anyway, next, at number 5, we're getting into the more special ones here. We're going, number 5 is Santa Maria Valley, number 205.
It's special.
Now, the thing is, in the preservation era, this type of locomotive is an incredibly underlooked sort of design. It's sort of pushed off to the side and mostly said as a very ununique locomotive, when in reality, take a look at it compared to 280s.
Andrew, what you reaching for?
This is one of my favorite toy trains as a kid, Geotrax. Oh, but anyway. But 205.
I'm
What?
watching the stream and I just noticed you yell, "Oh, aboard!" Back when Mattel had their own thing instead of Thomas and Friends.
Yeah. But Santa Maria Valley 205 is different from other 260s for one distinctive reason. It was the only steam locomotive to survive into the preservation era to have never had a single overhaul in its lifetime. Over a 40-year career, it has never been rebuilt. So all of the original components of the locomotive that it is using right now are original. As old can get. As original can be. As heritage. It screams. It is
we
the
have our heritage.
it is the true understanding of heritage in a steam locomotive. And the thing is, this makes it even harder to actually restore this locomotive because it is beyond worn out. And that's why they had such a hard time restoring Teleclen, which if you don't know is in the UK.
Currently under overhaul as well.
Yes. The thing is, Teleclen lasted a whopping 77 years in service without getting a proper overhaul. In fact, so worn out that crews called it the self-propelled bomb.
That's rough.
And I wish I was making that up. But to say the least, the fact that even Teleclen was somehow restored to better than new condition, it makes us wonder why we don't do some certain things like that with other locomotives. I mean, Teleclen was so heavily rebuilt that barely much of her original components are left. And in fact, some of the original components that are still left are starting to wear out, such as recently on her 150th birthday, her coupling rods snapped just weeks before her birthday.
Hell, there's probably enough parts there to rebuild a second Teleclen.
Most likely, actually. The thing is, you're not wrong. There's barely much original of the Teleclen. But it still breathes the life of Teleclen somehow.
What about her brother or sister?
Dolgok?
Yeah.
It's pretty similar when it comes to the rebuild. The only major difference is that Dolgok was in slightly better shape than Teleclen. Only slightly. But let's get back to 205. With this in mind, of this locomotive being literally the original of itself, and considering the fact that most of its actual original components were reused in its rebuild as much as possible, it's impressive. Because the thing is, with certain locomotives, especially of its size, you expect them to rebuild it in 15 or less years. But they really wanted this locomotive to be the best that it could be. And so, for a locomotive that is smaller than a 280, this locomotive took a whopping 41 years to restore. Although, at least it was finally completed. In fact, originally the goal for this locomotive's restoration was that they would complete it by the time before the main guy would forget where all the parts were.
That's rough.
That I wish I was making that up. They love to joke around on that locomotive. They also, in fact, they said that the dog or the cat was their quality tester. It was a joke. They loved to mess around over there. But 205 was in my opinion, was one of the best steam locomotive restorations that have brought out a like new locomotive recently. And not to mention, well, the restoration on its own was impressive because of how much original components they actually managed to salvage and reuse. Not to mention how worn out it got, how long it took to restore it. But the other thing is its wheel configuration. As I said earlier, this type of locomotive, which if you don't know is a 262 Prairie locomotive, is very underrated. There are other 262s that have operated and are currently operating, such as the one at the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad, number 25. Others have operated as well, which I forget their names and their numbers, but there are quite a few 262. But they're mostly overlooked. But Santa Maria Valley 205 seems to have overtaken the spotlight for any prairie, including ones that have made it history, like 1010. So 205, not only with its wheel arrangement and its extensive restoration, also has the distinction of one of the more beautiful ones. Because as I mentioned earlier with 81, with its unique paint scheme, which got it up a little bit higher, 205 is 205. It's a 262 Prairie. 205 is painted in a very lush white trimming with a green boiler and a gray smoke box. And it is one of the most attractive locomotives I've ever seen. I gotta love prairies. I seriously, I love prairies. I mean, even Jim is actually talking about my personal favorite German design for a steam locomotive, which is the Class 23, particularly 071, which is one with a roller bearing in the middle, which I don't know why that makes it stand out among the other one that's just over.
Great that is, Andrew.
Hmm?
I love moguls. You love prairies.
I like prairies. I like 280s. I love northerns, and I love mountain types.
Moguls are the best.
I love moguls. Anyway, though, so that I already mentioned that this locomotive was built in 1924, in January specifically.
I also love 240s.
I forgot to mention that it was built in that time. But, yeah. That's 204 for you. The only reason it's not higher on the list, even though it deserves to be, is because this locomotive is quite small. Of course. And the thing is, it's not the most historically important. Although it was the only steam locomotive in America to survive that never had a single rebuild, it still didn't bring that much to the table as historically impacting stuff. And now, let's get on to number 4. You guys ready for this?
Go.
Because number 4 is none other than one of the locomotives I work on. Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 2926. Now, as Jim has said before, that's just prime. 2926 is possibly my second favorite steam locomotive in the world. And I know what you're thinking. Why second favorite? It's just because it's second because its practicality takes over its looks sometimes. However, that doesn't stop me from loving it anymore. 2926 is possibly one of the most impacting locomotives I've ever been with. It literally was right next to my high school, and so I could visit it when they had a steam up. I could hear the whistle from my school. But anyway, let's get on to the history. 2926 was built in 1944 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, of course, as a 484. This particular specimen of the Baldwin was possibly one of the heaviest and the largest 484s ever built. With them fully loaded, they weighed almost 1,100,000 pounds. Which, to put that into perspective, a Union Pacific big boy weighs 1,200,000 pounds. But a 2900 weighs 1,000,000 pounds. In fact,
weighs 5 million.
And interesting enough is that the 2900s actually seem to be up there when it comes to the length of a Union Pacific Challenger. These things were possibly the largest 484s in the world, and currently the largest 484s in preservation. And not to mention, because of their weight, their tractive effort was greatly impressive at 79,000 pounds, which that's just 2,000 pounds less than N&W 611. However, this locomotive can go the same speed. Because of its interestingly good traction, the 2900s could achieve some interesting speeds as well as some interesting loads. In fact, 2926 was rumored by engineers to have gone 120 miles an hour. However, this is just a rumor. There's no true way to prove that the 2900s went this fast. However, they were designed to cruise at 100 miles an hour. But let's get into 2926's story. In 1954, 2926's career was finished. And just after 10 years of service, it was pulled into a... Thanks, Jim. But anyway, after just 10 years of service, 2926 was put on display in Coronado Park in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where I live. And after sitting in the park for roughly 80 years, of course, outside, exposed to the elements, with its asbestos still under the boiler jacketing, time was not faring well for this locomotive particularly. Until 1999, when a group of train enthusiasts, of course, found the locomotive in the park after, interesting enough, they were just having a talk over lunch, and they started chatting about the locomotive in the park. And wouldn't you know it, after that simple chat and 22 years of hard work, this locomotive moved under its own power for the first time since 1956. And now, the only major things that need to be completed on the locomotive is some of the boiler jacketing, which the boiler jacketing itself is pretty much complete. The handrails need to be added. The locomotive needs to be re-railed because after a couple of weeks ago, the locomotive had a steam-up accident where the trailing truck and the first axle on the tender derailed. But after...
Hey, Andrew. All right, so I actually do have a quote for the day. Well, it's more of a meme quote, but ready?
What?
All right, Andrew. I've seen a big boy. Josh, I've seen a big boy too. Shows a photo of Michael. Searcher.
But anyway, after this though, and the funny thing is, I was one of the first people to get a cab ride on the 2926 because I stayed there the entire day as they were steaming up the locomotive for its first moves. It was one of the most glorious things I've ever seen in my life. And so, getting out of the... There is a really good reason that this locomotive is going to be up there, especially since this locomotive is up there in tractive effort with the J classes. It's up there in speed with the GS4s, and it's also up there in practicality with 3751. Well, not really practicality, but more of the looks. The only reason that 2926 is a little bit low on the list is because there are quite a few 2900s that are in preservation. And we've also had two other 484s from the Santa Fe operating preservation, 3751 and 3759. But that's the only couple of reasons that 2926 is this slight bit lower. Now let's go to number 3, to the final 3, which we've talked about these locomotives before, but most of the time we talk about how overrated they can be, or how much we've heard about them, and how much we just want to stop and think about, like, hey, these are not the most powerful, these are not the largest, these are not the fastest, these are not the most impressive. But that doesn't stop it from being one of the most impressive machines in America.
Or heavy. Wait, they're not my sister.
Number 3 is Union Pacific 4014. And I'm pretty sure you would have seen this coming. And I'm not a huge fan of the big boys. But even if I'm not a big fan of the big boys, it does not deter me from putting them in their rightful place. Because 4014 was one of those locomotives that was thought to have never had a chance of being restored. In fact, in the documentary, Last of the Giants, in the very beginning, it was said that a big boy would most likely never run again. They're massive.
One from the scrapyard of the past.
They are 134 feet long and 1.2 million pounds in weight. These massive locomotives were built in 1941 by the American Locomotive Company of Schenectady, New York. And as we all know, the famous story of how they got the big boys. Originally, these locomotives were going to be called Overland types. But someone cheekily had a better name for these and ended up writing a very descriptive name on the smoke box. And now we know them as the big boys.
Well, they have a better name at least. I would have never called them by that name.
Overland types?
Yeah, that's just stupid.
Yeah. And after the big boys were created, being some of the very first larger, simple articulated steam locomotives.
I'm glad they're named after my favorite burger joint.
There's a burger joint called Big Boys.
Yes, there is. I cannot believe it. But there's a big burger joint called Big
Boys. They're going to be called... Oh, okay. They were going to be called Wasatch types.
Okay, that's gay. I don't like it.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Hello, my beautiful American people. But oh my god, let's get back to it. But yeah, I'm sorry. They are called Wasatch types.
Anyway.
But that's still worse. Wasatch doesn't seem right. Big Boys is more fitting, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they can eat hamburgers and think of the big boy. Or you could take the big boy to the drive-thru of Big Boy, get a Big Boy burger.
These were some... But anyway, let's get back to these. These were some of the more... This particular locomotive, these special ones, were the largest successful steam locomotives ever built. Note, successful. Because we've talked about the S1, which is 146 feet long. Which is 12 feet longer than a big boy. But that thing sucked. But that's why... That's one of the biggest reasons, no pun intended, that I appreciate the big boy. It's because it's the largest, it was successful, it was practical, and it wowed everyone that had the privilege to see one.
Everyone, would you like to know how to trigger Andrew in a matter of seconds?
But anyway.
Triplex.
That doesn't work on me anymore.
Damn it. Okay, Hunky Express. It's so hunky.
Anyway.
Squeak, squeak, I'll break your feet. Let's get back to work.
But anyway, with these big boys, particularly built, of course, it was expected that these would be incredibly strong. However, I've found myself, and I've proven on multiple occasions, that this isn't the strongest steam locomotive. Although that doesn't... Yes, the strongest steam locomotive ever built was the Norfolk and Western Y6B, 177,000 pounds, compared to a big boy having just under 140,000 pounds.
You're about to get crushed by the big boys fandom.
Which, fuck you, because the thing is, that's the truth. But anyway, while these aren't the strongest, they are definitely some of the most impressive. And surprisingly, these locomotives lasted into the 60s, where it was then that they were finally said to have never ran again. And with 7 big boys from the original batch, and 135,000 pounds. Okay. Just over, anyway. But with 7 original big boys and 1 second big boy, a second batch of big boys. If you don't know, there was a second batch of big boys made, which they had a slightly higher tractive effort and were slightly bigger. And this particular specimen of the big boys were interesting because there's only one of these left, 4023. Which is actually, interestingly, one of the best preserved big boys, aside from 4014, of course, which I'll get into that in a little bit.
You know, the last steamers in existence, like the very last ones to ever be built, were the Pennsylvanias, right?
Nah.
Shit.
Nah. The Norfolk and Western kept building their locomotives quite late, actually. But anyway.
Well, we got one steam locomotive that's being built in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway.
We'll never have to deal with birds in that lighting. What'd you do? John, stop bird nest and house things.
Anyway,
shit. Why am I fucking fuck?
You guys already know the history of the big boys. And plus, there are thousands of videos out there that explain the history of these things. So let's get to the history of the restoration on its own. So the thing is, most people have talked about the history of the big boys themselves. They've talked about how powerful they are. They talked about you know what I mean. But most people don't talk about the most incredible thing about it. The restoration of one of them. It's one of the things that most people forget that we need to be very thankful for. It's one of those things that make people think that every other locomotive in the world can be restored because of it. 4014, to say the least, was a lucky son of a bitch. Because after 3985, the Challenger locomotive, which has recently been sold, which is going to run again, hopefully, 3985, of course, was completely worn out. In fact, it was so worn out that they found that it would have been cheaper to restore a big boy than to overhaul 3985. Which that is crazy, considering the fact. But with this in mind, they needed to find one particular big boy that was in the best possible condition. There were ones that were kept inside, such as 4005, 4006. Well, 4006, is that inside? There were some that were kept outside, but were incredibly well preserved. 4023 would have been one of them. However, the one big boy that they found was in the best possible shape for them to restore was 4014, which was at the Rail Giants Train Museum, alongside other famous large locomotives, such as the 9000. And, of course, none other than Southern Pacific 5021. Soon you'll run again. I'm just kidding. But with this, once they found 4014 being the best of the ones they could find when it comes to their condition, it was then that they started a $5.5 million restoration. And it started when they started laying track across a road in order to get it back out onto the main line and roll it to their shops. Something similar was done with 2926, where
Question.
Hmm?
How did the road stand up to it?
I actually don't know. I guess I'll find out in a little bit. But there was
Because
something similar.
When tanks go over the road, they tend to crack the ground underneath them. So I would wonder how a steam engine would do on that.
I don't know. But let's get to this. So a similar sort of method was used with 2926. Since 2926's tracks were basically completely torn away from it, they had to use some temporary tracks, lay it across the commercial roads, and tow the locomotive across those tracks back onto normal railroad. And they did this of what?
That I want to see that. That would be really cool.
Well, there's actual video of the 4014 having been done this, which this was one of the first times that the 4014 had moved. This was one of the farthest runs it had done, because when it was at the Rail Giants Train Museum, which this was one of the best reasons that they chose 4014, the Rail Giants Train Museum actually occasionally oiled the locomotive up and moved it back and forth ever so slightly. Every couple of months, they would move it back and forth just to keep it in really good condition. They maintained that thing very well, despite it being a display piece. It was,
look at it now.
And wouldn't you know, their efforts paid off. But we'll get into that. After the 4014 was towed out of the museum, it was towed to the Union Pacific shops by 4 UP diesel locomotives at the same time. Which this was the first time anyone had seen a Union Pacific big boy out on the rails since the 60s. This was the first time. And even though it wasn't under its own power, they were still able to power the whistle using compressed air. Which this was awesome on its own. And so once they got it to the shops, they spent about an impressive 5 years. They spent 5 years, just 5 years, restoring the big boy. In fact, it was said that the locomotive was in such good condition that you could fire it up then and there. That you could, but the flues were still expired. But to say the least, it was in fantastic condition, and they had a decent budget to do so. Although there was one big thing that they couldn't do. They couldn't burn coal in that thing. Are you crazy? You crazy? Imagine trying to burn coal in a locomotive that's twice the size of most of those northerns. And there's few northerns that burn coal now. So, and those barely operate on the main line. So imagine trying to get a big boy to burn coal. It's not going to happen. However, this was interesting because previously there was another Union Pacific big boy that had been tested to have burned oil. And that was 4005, the one that wrecked. Was that 4005 only was converted using one small burner. And because of this small burner, it was deemed as a failure. But when 4014 was converted to burn oil, they used 2 massive oil burners. And with that, they also actually increased the tractive effort of the locomotive by enlarging its cylinders by this much. So it increased the tractive effort from 35,000 pounds on 4014 to 40,000 pounds. To say the least, their rebuild for the 4014 was literally better than new. And with that, we can't thank them enough for doing this. And I don't think we'll ever find enough ways to thank them for doing what they have done. Because I've said this before. We really need to be thankful. We seriously, I'm talking to each and every one of you. We need to be thankful that these guys are actually taking the time and the effort and the money and the financial assets and the political knowledge to actually restore these. Because even if it's a locomotive as small as a porter, it takes a lot of work to restore even the smallest of locomotives. It takes a ton. It not only takes a lot of work, takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of experience and a lot of love to make this happen. And yes, I saw Jim. But hold on.
Someone's dragging off our internet, and I think it's John.
But this, we seriously need to be appreciative. But there is a problem. Ever since the 4014 was restored, there have been small groups of people saying, or, spreading words that certain larger locomotives are being restored. In fact, there was a rumor going around for a while that they were going to restore the cab forward. That's just a rumor. It's just a rumor. It's not happening. Mostly because of its size. Second, because of the regulations. And third, it's inside a building. It's locked. So sorry. And other locomotives that have ran in preservation probably won't run again, such as 1218. And for those who don't know, I'm sorry to say this, but 1218 wasn't as good as we thought she was. The A classes on their own were fantastic locomotives with great amounts of tractive effort and endurance speed, but particularly 1218, we got the lemon out of the bunch.
Checking out that clip of the big boy.
We got the lemon. We could have gotten another A class, and it would have been much better. We could have gotten 1240, which has ran in preservation, but was sadly cut up by the 70s. But instead, 1218 was the lemon. It ended up having a lot of problems that we never actually really knew about. In fact, the saddest part is that when 1218 was officially retired, crews were actually happy that they didn't have to drive that thing again. Yikes. Things happened on it, such as the whistle would go over pressure a lot, which is very noticeable when you watch videos of it. The air compressor would give out every once in a while, and little small things like that made the crews hate working on 1218. So sadly, even if you were able to find new parts for it, which that would be expensive on its own, restoring it just wouldn't be practical anymore. Not only would you have to convert it to burnt oil, there's no question about it, but you would have to rebuild it to the point that it would be better than when it was built, better than factory fresh, better. Everything needs to be better than new. So if you wanted to restore 1218, good luck. But I'm sorry, but it might not happen. And other locomotives like 3985.
3 Union Pacifics and 1 Southern Pacific hauling the big boy. Wow.
It's a big locomotive, but
No, it is.
Let's get back to it. But even with 3985, we're incredibly lucky that that thing even ran. And yet people keep asking for other bigger locomotives to run, like the Alleghenies or the Yellowstones or more compounds or even the 2156. But the thing is, we have to be extremely lucky that we even got a big boy to run. And I seriously can't. I stay up at night wondering what was going through their heads saying that they could actually do it. And when they did, I think about this way too often, that a lot of people aren't grateful that we have a big boy. And people complain about certain things about it, like its paint job or the fact that it burns oil. I don't care about that kind of stuff.
It's still a big boy. It
It's
looks
still
like a big boy.
it's still a wonderful, amazing, loud, inspiring piece of machinery. And the
Listen
fact
to
that
this.
some of you don't like that it's running, and the fact that you don't have the actual heart and the knowledge and the overall humanity to understand that there was a lot of work put into this, then you're not human.
If it looks like a big boy and runs like a big boy, then it's a big boy.
You don't have to like the big boys to appreciate them. You don't need to completely research them and write down every little speck about them and remember it by heart. But even with those small things, you can still appreciate that this thing is running. And I still can't understand how some people literally want the 4014 to stop existing.
Remember this, Andrew. There's always going to be idiots out there.
There's always going to be the kind of person to say no to something that is trying to do good. Like with nuclear power. Because the only reason nuclear power has gotten a bad name is because of 2 accidents that were caused by negligence. Human error is the number 1 cause of disasters.
Remember, 2016 to 2020, they were thinking about incorporating nuclear power in the States, but due to politics, it never happened.
And now we got wind turbines that are incredibly hard to dispose of when they run out, when their time runs out.
Also, in 2021, I think it was, or 2020, remember when Texas had the big freeze?
Yes.
No wind came through, and turbines even froze up. Same thing, solar panels got covered up as well, and Texas was in a complete blackout.
I don't get what's wrong with people sometimes.
And
I seriously don't.
And the thing is, when people were bringing this up, they tried to hide it. They said, Texas isn't having any trouble. They're having blackouts because coal ran out, or something like that. Pisses me off.
But what I'm saying with 4014 is the biggest reason, it's the only reason that it's a little bit lower is because of what has done to the community. It has made the community selfish, divided.
The only thing, I'll tell you this. Personally, I like the big boy. It is a favorite engine of mine, but not up at the top. But the only reason it isn't is just because it's so overrated. That's the only reason that it's not higher up on my list.
Yeah. But the 4014, despite being an eyesore to the community, is an impressive, wonderful, and inspiring machine that was brought back due to the sheer determination of the Union Pacific Steam team.
Not to mention, it is also charming in a way.
It has the charm because of its impracticality, because it's big and for its size is a little bit underpowered, but still holds the amount of overall arcing amazement that a steam locomotive should give out. And I don't think, and personally, I don't think any other locomotives of its size will ever be restored. I don't think a Yellowstone will ever be pulled out of a museum and restored to operation. I don't think, and sadly, as much as I hate to say this, I don't think 2156 will ever turn a wheel under its own power again.
Even not to mention, shit, what? Keep going.
Just one, because of its cracked frame, but the biggest reason is because of its size. We don't need large locomotives to impact the public, even though the 4014 has, but we don't need them. As amazing as they are, it's best if some of those larger locomotives never run again. That way, we can keep imagining if they ever will.
You know what?
Because
I'll
by
save it for another stream.
because by the time they do run, we'll be wanting more, and we'll keep desiring, and we'll keep asking. Because after 4014 was restored, they started asking about the Alleghenies and things like that. I already mentioned.
And we have 2100 that's getting help too.
Yeah, we have a lot of amazing locomotives that are being restored that most
And
people don't even
4070.
that most people don't know about, that are being overthrown by locomotives that just are bigger. And that's it. Like,
Yeah, and you have me over here calling for Albert to be restored.
yeah,
And
there's
Albert's a nothing locomotive compared to those.
exactly. But you get what I mean. Please, for the love of God, every single one of you, be happy and be appreciative that any of these locomotives ran or are running currently. Be happy that not because they're don't feel bad because 3985 was currently retired, but feel good that 3985 ran at all. And feel good that we have footage of it. And feel good that we know that currently it's going to be taken care of. Anyway, sorry for that.
That's great.
Let's get on to number 2. That was just number 3.
Oh, I need to take a shit.
Oh, okay, that we needed that. But anyway. Anyway, number 2 is Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad, number 576. Which, if you don't know, is the only steam locomotive left from the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad. And at one time was Johnny Cash's favorite steam locomotive. In fact, he wrote a couple of songs about it. The only reason that this is just number 2 is because it's a northern. But it is an incredibly unique northern. In fact, these locomotives were also actually nicknamed something different. They were called Dixies instead of northerns. 576's story begins in 1942 by the American Locomotive Company of Schenectady, New York. Of course, directly built for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad. Since it was one of those northerns up, it was classified as a J3 and designed with some of the latest locomotive technology of the time, especially when it came to roller bearings and a streamlined front, which is one of the most attractive parts of it. Although one of the other names it was nicknamed was the Stripe, due to its yellow stripe that elongated the locomotive. With 70-inch drivers and two 25 by 30-inch cylinders, the attractiveness of this thing wasn't the highest at 57,000 pounds, but it was still enough for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad. And along with them being called Dixies and the Stripes, they also called 576 specifically the Yellow Jacket. And after it was retired in 1952, it still managed to capture those alike. In fact, even when the locomotive was still in the park, they had events surrounding it that didn't involve restoring it, but were just about commemorating it. In fact, a miniature live steam locomotive version of the 576 was right next to the actual one and was fired up and ran there. Johnny Cash, of course, has a famous photo of himself standing in front of one of the drivers of the locomotive. And ever since then, it was said to have never ran again. Of course, until now. 576 the restoration of this locomotive started in 2016, with a small group of people wanting to restore this locomotive for operation. Originally, it just started with an idea, and over time, it grew even bigger. With an open house held where with the chance of blowing the whistle under compressed air, and the actual whistle of the locomotive leased out to the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society to test out on 765, more people started becoming more fascinated by this locomotive than there were ever before. And ever since then, the locomotive has been going through a rocky restoration, with a thunderstorm halting its restoration for quite a while, actually, with the thunderstorm in particular throwing a piece of wood into the engine shed, not damaging the locomotive, but damaging the house that it was stored in. And over this time, and currently, 576's drivers are currently expected to be returned to the locomotive soon. And most likely, Tennessee will finally have a solid baseline mainline excursion star for them. And it is only then that we can celebrate the return of the stripe. I love that thing. I seriously love that thing. But before we go to number one, let's...
Sorry.
No, you can go. I'm going to talk about the honorable mentions.
I'm joking. I'm not needing to piss. I went a while ago.
Okay, but anyway. So some honorable mentions.
Piss.
Central Maine 470. That's one of them that I know of at the moment. 18. Does 769 count? Because
769.
I guess
That's a tough one.
I mean I guess it counts because
Andrew,
but
if you're gonna include 769, you need to include the 2100.
Well, 2100 is not an underdog excursion star.
Oh.
I'm talking about underdogs, the ones that have never hauled a single excursion but are going to.
Oh, okay.
Or have recently, actually done so. So locomotives like 2102 or any retired excursion stars that returned recently, I won't be including those. What's another one that that came back to service but has never hauled an excursion? What was that Great Northern locomotive that? I guess 17 counts because it was built recently.
Well, I guess we have a small list together.
Well, that's for just that. But what else has returned recently that? Well, 611 doesn't count. Underdogs. Well, that's all I can think of at this moment. Well, let's get to number one. And I bet a lot of you are going to go crazy over this locomotive. Number one on my list of the top 10 underdog steam excursion stars is none other than Chesapeake and Ohio 1309. Now what do I really say about this locomotive that hasn't been said already? Oh yeah, 9466 is an underdog. Okay, but let's get to 1309. So for those who don't know, 1309 is the very last mainline steam locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Built in 1949 for the Chesapeake and Ohio. Originally, it was known as an H6 Mogul Mallet, which is a 2662. It's basically two moguls back to back. 26 plus 26, or 62. But 1309 originally was actually known as a lemon. As I mentioned earlier about 1218, that thing was a lemon and not really restored or maintained very well. And that was the case with 1309 originally. In service, 1309 was not very well looked after or very well actually built. Because I'm not sure if you guys knew this, but compound articulated locomotives are literally impossible to time when it comes to their valve timing. And this is why you can hear when 1309 is running that the valve timing is slightly off. Because timing a compound articulated locomotive is like trying to time a clock that is not really like it's like trying to perfectly set the printing bed of a 3D printer. It's nearly impossible. The best that you can do is the closest that you can get. And that's the way with Malay articulateds. They're incredibly difficult to time. And because of this, 1309 suffered in revenue service. And after this, after 1949, it only spent about 7 years in service.
You're not gonna believe this, Andrew. I'm gonna send you something in DMs. You're not gonna believe this.
Well, 1309 spent a 7 years in service, just hauling coal trains.
And Challenger.
And with this, it was one of the last Baldwin locomotives still. It was amazing.
I've got a Challenger. You're not going to believe this.
It spent about 21 years outside in the C&O yards until it was moved to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum for static display, where it stayed for quite a while, exposed to the elements, not really cared, and watching dwarfed little tank engines running beside it, as well as some smaller locomotives. Whereas it was littered with bird poop and desert sand, and it was in poor shape, to say the least. Until finally, the flame was reignited for this Baldwin survivor. In 2014, the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad, of course, purchased the 1309, where originally they wanted to buy 2700, which, was it 2700? I think it was one of the canals. But anyway, 1309 was bought by the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad, as their 734 locomotive was quickly approaching its age. And so, just after it was pulled out, it was sent to the Western Maryland by railroad, of course. And after quite a long time, a not so lengthy 7-year restoration, where for some reason people say that 1309's restoration took a long time. That is nothing compared to 205, and it's nothing compared to 2926. And it's also nothing compared to a certain Union Pacific Connie that hasn't even ran under its own power. Be grateful, motherfuckers. So that's actually an impressive restoration. 7 years for a compound. Which, on December 31st, 2020, which I actually got to witness live, 1309 moved under its own power for the first time since 1956.
Let me guess, Andrew. Is there any footage you can't find of you not yelling in it?
No, I didn't see it in person. I saw it live on Trains Magazine.
Shit.
But I would have loved to have seen it in person. But anyway, after after about a year of break-in runs and testing runs with the 1309, not really, but yeah, about a year actually, the 1309 entered excursion service for the first time ever. And it hauled its very first passenger train ever on December 17th, 2021. And this was the very first time a Malay articulated locomotive of this type has operated of a specifically a 2662 tender locomotive, where certain compound articulateds have operated, such as those tank engines and the skookum. But this was the largest Malay type to have operated in preservation at the time of this recording now. Where, keep in mind, 1218 isn't a compound articulated. The 4014 isn't a compound. Those are simple articulateds. If you don't know the difference between a compound and a simple, you might need to know, because this is some crucial information. But at the time that we are recording this, 1309 has literally been restored to better than new condition. Because as I
triplex restored.
None of them are left, Josh.
Shit.
Yeah. Anyway, though, with 1309 being restored, the Western Maryland did an incredible job. Not only restoring it to operating condition, but operating it to such a state that it is deemed as better than new condition, to the point where it is better than it would have ever been when being built from the factory. In fact, the valve timing on it, despite sounding a little bit off, is the best, is the closest the 1309's valve timing has ever been to being perfect. And now, with the 1309 running, it actually has the capability and the tractive effort to haul literally everything on the Western Maryland's roster. And one more interesting thing before I end with 1309 is that when they fired her up and were testing her, the sound of her whistle could be heard throughout the entirety of Maryland. And thus, for a while, she was nicknamed Maryland Thunder. Although nowadays, the crew like to call her Fat Girl, due to the size of her boiler and her compound cylinders.
No, that's just mean.
They affectionately call her Fat Girl. And not only is this...
If I walk up to my sister and call her fat, I wouldn't be in the greatest condition.
Although, even though I've already mentioned most of the special things, there's actually one last special thing about this locomotive. It's the first and only steam locomotive to operate in preservation with smokebox mounted air compressors, which most people would say is an eyesore. Most people would say it just looks hideous. But for a lot of people, it makes it look more godly, more powerful, more beefy.
Dummy.
But to say the least, I think we have a lot to be thankful for when it comes to 1309's restoration.
Dummy thick.
You can think what you want about how the 1309 looks with either the paint scheme or the smokebox mounted air compressors. But for a fact, you literally cannot complain about how incredible this locomotive was restored. And you can't complain because most likely this locomotive wouldn't have ever ran again if it wasn't for the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. And I don't think anything like this would have ever been restored unless they started the trend. The closest we would have had to it would have been the skookum, and that's one of only two existing 2442 compound articulated.
Moguls.
No, not moguls. They're not compound moguls. Those two 442s.
Fine.
But I think we seriously have a lot to thank when it comes to how these certain locomotives have been restored. The fact that they're even running now, the fact that they are said to be ready for decades of future excursions, and the fact that any of them were even preserved. And particularly 1309 gets the top spot due to its incredibly unique status, its incredibly unique mechanical nature, and the overall feasibility that another one of these will ever be restored again. And that's why I picked 1309 as my number one on my top 10 underdog Steam excursion stars.
I'm surprised the big boy was on the list.
A lot. I'm surprised that a couple of other things were also on the list, but we still, in conclusion, we need to be incredibly thankful that any of these were restored, especially since other locomotives could have been taken in their favor, such as ones that had already ran in preservation, ones that had already had the mileage, some that already had newer parts, and that's why some of those, some of
Think of the D51s. Back in the 1930s, they really only did passenger service. Nowadays, after they're retired, only 2 of them operate, and both of them full excursions in Japan. Well, you could say they're excursions, but they're really just passengers.
But yeah, I mean, did you guys know that there's a Southern Pacific 210-2 that's said to be under restoration? That's said to have been a thing. We seriously need to be thankful that any of these were even thought of for restoration. We also need to be thankful that some of these were preserved, or some of these were even ran in the past. The Reading T1s, the only way that the Reading T1s would have ever survived is through the Iron Horse Rambles. If the Iron Horse Rambles never existed, most likely we wouldn't have any Reading steam locomotives.
Andrew. There's even people that complain about the two D51s in existence that still run. But guess what?
What?
There may be a chance that another one might possibly run. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's a D51 in Japan that is incredibly well preserved that if, something was to happen, who knows? It might run again.
But yeah.
It's fired under compressed air. I forget the number of it, though.
But before I end the stream, I'm going to take a look at what you guys said in the chat. And then I'm going to say my farewells for a while because I'm going to be moving on for a while. But let's see here. Hey, Andrew.
This isn't the end of Burning Subjects, though.
It's not the end, but it will be for a while. Especially because next time I ever do one of these, we'll be doing a brand new cool wall. We'll be taking down all of these pictures, and I'll have a brand new big wall for us to put all of them on. That way, when I'm streaming, you can take a look at the wall in the background.
I recommend a whiteboard or a painter's board or something.
Yeah. And plus, then I won't have to overlap every steam locomotive every time we do one. But I will be taking down the old cool wall. I will be putting every single photo into a box, and they will be ready for the next time that we do it. And the thing is, next time, instead of putting them on the wall based on, their regions, we'll be doing it at complete random. So yeah. But let's take a look at what you guys said. Hey, Andrew, I missed your Burning Subject videos. Oh, you'll be missing them even more when I'm gone for a while. Oh, nice. Hey, guys, I'm off for the summer, and I'm a senior in high school now. Oh, nice. Getting closer. Andrew, I saw the engine in the thumbnail and as a Florida man, I love anything Atlantic coastline. I already know we're gonna be. Yep, we already did. Yes. Built-in. Oh, yes, I already mentioned that. Hello. Wait, it's Astro Train? What's Astro Train?
Well, one of the references you made.
Okay. Yes, Transformers reference because you said more than meets the. Ah, yes. Oh, yeah, though. Well, that's just prime. Anyway,
See?
dun dun dun. 3713 is Giga Chad. Yes. Are we gonna be talking about 470? Yeah, we did in honorable mentions, which is under restoration. If you don't know, I missed 2317. Me too. Even though it might not run again because it's in 2317 is said to be in literally scrapyard condition. Sorry. But anyway, the old name of okay. Did you guys see the video? Yes, we already did. I prefer the high-pitched hooter. Yes, I do. I like both the hooter and the 6 giant. Me too. Doesn't 1504? I still don't know if 1504 has bigger valve gear. I'll have to find that out. Cuba has a lot of Baldwin-built locomotives. Yes, they do actually. And the funny thing is, I found that they have a locomotive that vaguely resembles number 3. Although, for some reason, I like that locomotive more than I like the actual number 3. Probably because it's actually doing something that means something besides from being in films. Anyway, let's see. Josh likes 260 moguls. Andrew likes 262 prairies. So who likes 264 Adriatics, which are usually tank engines? I think you know. I think you know. I think you know who likes them. Anyway, correction. Then yeah, I saw that. Okay, correction. 80,000 pounds of tractor beaver. Okay, big boys were originally going to be called Wasatch types. Yes, I saw that. Hello, 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 my beautiful people. Overlands were 410-2s, and big boys were just under 330 feet long. Okay, Hyriso. The thing is though that the Southern Pacific's 410-2s were called Southern Pacific types or SP types. Huh. The second generation of big boys were also the heaviest steam locomotives in the world in terms of locomotive weight. The last N&W locomotives built was the S1 and the last N&W locomotive built was the S1-A 080-244 built in 1953. Is that locomotive preserved? I actually wonder. 4005 and 4017 are inside. Okay. Very good care by the museum volunteers, plus dry weather in the Pomona, California, relatively quick rebuild. Actually, Andrew, rebuilding 4014 began in late 2016, and they finished it. Yeah, okay. That I forgot. Okay, and while the engine did get the extreme repairs it needed, the rebuild was still slightly rushed, but only a few minor minor cosmetic bits. Nope. Okay, let's see here. If I were to restore the Yellowstones, I would move the Westinghouse air pumps to under the running board. At that point, you might as well just cosmetically disguise it as an EM1. But anyway, Chernobyl, 3.5 out of 10. What? Here in the UK, oops. Where was I? Yeah, here in the UK, wind turbines actually work extremely well. Then again, I expect they to work extremely well, especially in offshore turbines. For me, I'm happy we have 8 big boys left at all. There are a lot of locomotives that people tried to preserve that were unable to, and when they could, it was just too late. Yeah, like how we almost got a Y6B. We almost got 4274, if I remember. We almost got 2613, 774. Yeah, we missed out on a lot of locomotives. Shit.
Well, hey, we got a good list at least.
Yeah, we got quite a few. And if we're desperate enough, we might just cosmetically disguise some of them as other locomotives. Like I mentioned earlier about the EM1s. You know, you could cosmetically disguise a Yellowstone as an EM1. Or maybe a fantasy paint scheme of sorts. Like, imagine if a certain other railroad got a big boy or something like that. We're doing what the Western Maryland did. Since there's only 2 Western Maryland locomotives actually left, then they just painted theirs to look like Western Maryland ones. Yeah. There is also a song lyric that I really like. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone? Instant James May Beans moment. Beans. Anyway, Mountain Thunder? Ah, yes, and I'm talking about the farts. Actually, should I make that joke public? Because I made a video a little while back that was a giant fart joke about Mountain Thunder. You know, Mountain Thunder. The name itself describes the girth and smell of my ghastly farts. Okay, let's see. It's a Dixie. It was a J3-57 more specifically. Also, will the locomotive be given her bullet nose during her restoration? I actually don't know, but I'd like to see that. Hold up. Great Western 9466. Yes! For those who don't know, 9466 actually ran on the main line, despite it being a tank engine. But anyway, some of the 5700s were also mainline certified. Okay. I think it was 2705. Okay, that would make sense if it was. It's an eyesore in my opinion. About the air compressors, it can be, but I think it makes it look more industrial. And on that bombshell, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye. Southern Pacific.
Bye, everyone.
Not yet, but it was what they said. Southern Pacific 982. It also has a booster on it. It was on display at Minute Maid Park. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? I got to see it Plinth in 2017. Jim, so you're telling me a Big Boy's restoration was shorter than a Pacific? But then again, 148 was in worse condition. Yeah, it was. Can we put the N&W K1 and K2 mountains on the cool wall? Maybe when we have our next burning subject session. I might even throw them in. UP had a really good STEAM team with the technology for designing and making new parks. To say nothing about the metrics shit ton of corporation funding. Let's see. I'm going to say 1504 is better than 5629. Yes! Yes! Finally someone said it! Anyway, 244 isn't preserved. Damn. Moment of silence. Okay. Cosmetically disguised as an EM1. Yes, that should be... Maybe. I was just throwing something out there. Hey, Jim, should I make a t-shirt that says that Atlanta coastline 1504 is better than 5629? Deal with it. Yes, you should make that. Yes, you should make that. As in the Mountain Thunder video. And yes, as in the Mountain Thunder video should be public. Jim, thank you. I'll make it. No, I was referring to, but not the teacher. Well, saying, let's see, saying that you want 5629, but 1504 is basically saying that you want the soup of the day, but you get the soup du jour. In reality, they are the same thing. Don Vito experience, the most important message of all. The most important message of all time. Andrew, you are...
What?
What am I?
Dead. I mean, what?
What am I? What am I? I'm waiting for it. The Pancake Man? Are you kidding me?
Not just the Pancake Man. He's the Pigeon Man.
The Pancake Man. Really? Oh my god. Okay, I was not expecting the Pancake Man.
Okay. That was perfect.
Well, that's all of the chat read. And all I can say is thank each and every one of you for showing up to the streams. I want to thank everyone who actually, was in the streams with us. And most likely, next time on our Burning Subjects, we might actually have some real guest speakers. We'll have some more stuff. We'll have new things. It's gonna be great. But all I can say is thank you so much for coming to these streams. Thank you for being a part of them. Thank you for laughing with us. Thanks for contributing to the stream. And as always, we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Seriously.